This is Including You, the new series from Lead at Any Level. Including You features stories from chief diversity officers and other executives who are creating inclusive cultures in their organizations. Our goal is to show what's working in companies just like yours, to give you the tools you need to keep pushing for progress in your own workplace. We want to create belonging and opportunity for everyone, including you. And now here's your host, Amy C. Waninger.
Welcome back to Including You. I'm your host, Amy C. Waninger, the Inclusion Catalyst. My guest today is Dr. Ted Samuel. He's the Senior Director of Oberlin Shansi, which provides grants and fellowships to young professionals to promote individual and creative engagement with Asia. Oberlin Shansi supports 16 to 18 international fellows in India, China, Indonesia, and Japan, 4 full-time staff, and 4 to 6 visiting scholars. Dr. Samuel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you. Love talking to folks in higher ed because people who work with college students and young professionals are really at the leading edge of where the workforce is and where it's headed. And I think that the lessons that you all are learning and the environments that you're creating need to be replicated and understood throughout the economy. So I am so thrilled to talk to you today.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. And I inhabit a really unique space, which has been the borderland between higher ed and nonprofit, because we are an independent nonprofit that is in many ways integrated with Oberlin College and its history. But we have a lot of benefit of having our own autonomy as an organization too, which has allowed us to experiment in ways because we are a smaller organization that might not happen in a bigger institution. So I'm really excited to be here and talk about what I've learned, and I've learned a lot in the last 5 years.
That's great. Let's start simple. Why is inclusion so important for your program for Oberlin Shansi?
Yeah, it is exceptionally important for my work, which is really about intercultural engagement and international exchange. And one of the reasons being is you are interacting with people who have very different life experiences than you when you go abroad, one. But two, we're seeing a lot of interest and actual applications for our programs from LGBTQ plus identified folks, from BIPOC folks, and historically, international fellowships and international exchange programs, there's always been a presumed straight whiteness to it, if you will, in the sense that not everyone was straight or white who did it, but the way that orientation programs were run and the way that support systems were not really addressing issues of identity. And I speak from experience, having been a participant in 3 international fellowships myself, and having learned about the history of this organization that has done wonderful work, but has not necessarily overtly addressed some of the questions and some of the challenges that folks face because of their identity. And I think that is one of the reasons why it is important for us to step up and ensure that we're not just brushing things under the rug and we're not hiding away from uncomfortable conversations about race, about class, about sexual identity. I think that's really important for us to do. And we want to make sure that this program, that the types of exchanges that we offer are designed for everyone. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that we're training people correctly, but also making sure that we have the proper resources in order to invest in our fellows in the way that they deserve.
You said so much there that I want to ask a million questions about because when you were talking, there were so many things that popped up. What would you do about this? And how do you handle this? But I'll keep it simple for our audience. Can you share 1 or 2 initiatives or 1 or 2 strategies or tactics that you use to help make this real for your fellows, for your students, for your staff?
Absolutely. One of the things that I've spearheaded is making sure that we have sessions in our training for our fellowship program specifically, because it's a 2-year engagement. That's a long time to live abroad, to live and work in India, China, Indonesia, or Japan, or we have a fellow in the Philippines right now as well. We cannot train you how to be queer abroad. We cannot train you how to be a person of color abroad. Like, that's not possible because we don't know the depth of the experiences that folks will face, and we can't predict the future. But we want to make sure that in our orientation program that we're explicitly addressing possibilities and that we're explicitly building community. So one of the ways that we've done that is through these storytelling panels from recent alumni who identify as LGBTQ plus or who are BIPOC in order to talk about their experiences. And we give them really simple questions that allow them to talk about their experience in whatever depth they want. It invites them to be as vulnerable as they would like to be, but also just allowing our fellows not to feel like they're being talked at, but that they're being let into experiences of people who may identify similarly as they do. So we ask questions about what is the biggest challenge that you face that you didn't expect? What is some advice you would give to yourself from 2 years ago? What are some of the beautiful moments that you experienced? Because I think that's really important as well. Like we can't just focus on, oh, what are the things that make you scared? What are the things that brought you joy? Like your identities are beautiful and they should be celebrated, but we also want to make sure that you understand what challenges people have actually faced. And these sessions are typically an hour long with 3 to 4 panelists. I think that there's a certain relatability to them because we encourage panelists to be as goofy, as funny, as much themselves as they want. The other thing that we really do want to think about is, do you want Shansi staff there? And we always ask the panelists and we always ask the fellows, just because I don't want anyone to feel like they need to reveal things to me that they don't want to, or that they feel like they need to hold back. But I think one way of also getting around that is because I do learn a lot from these sessions is we invite people to have conversations outside of the panel, offline. We offer a list of support services in the local countries to where they're going, but also the contact information. And some of the conversations that have happened afterwards that have been told to me, they range from like, how do I date in Japan as a queer person? Or where can I get proper hair care in Indonesia? These kinds of questions, maybe they don't want to ask when I'm in their presence, but they have the space to do that offline. And that's really important. So I think that those panels have been remarkably successful. Another thing that we started was the Fellows Support Fund. We understand that DEI work, real, true, meaningful DEI work requires resources. And I think that is something that often gets missed in conversations. So we went directly to donors and told them that we're doing this. It started off as a fund to help fellows who were dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Running international exchanges during a pandemic is next to impossible, and we moved completely online. But we wanted to give the fellows who stayed with us for the 2 years teaching from their childhood bedrooms in the United States or working for a nonprofit or a UN agency from their childhood bedroom. We wanted them the opportunity to go to Asia on their own terms. So we raised money for that. But then we extended the Fellow Support Fund to fellowships, international exchange. It's often a rich kid's game. It's often a rich young person's game. And we wanted to make sure that if someone's computer broke when they're living abroad, they need that computer to do their job. And our stipends are pretty generous, but to buy a new computer or to fix a computer, that's taking a big chunk out of it. And it's what can we do to make sure that there are safety nets for all folks, especially those who absolutely need that additional support. I think that is another kind of program that really has helped us focus on our DEI work to make sure that money is not a barrier to being able to participate in these programs, and that you get selected for this program based on your passion and your merit, not because of the fact that you have a safety net and someone else doesn't.
That's so important. And I think we don't talk about this enough when we talk about study abroad programs, in unpaid internships, which are the most infuriating thing in my mind. I was
Yeah.
having a conversation with my 15-year-old, and he asked me, he's like, why do people do internships and if they don't pay? And I said, there are a lot of reasons, but my guess is that this started because kids who didn't have to work their way through high school and college needed work experience, and this was a way for them to get it. And the problem with that is kids who do have to work their way through high school and college don't have the opportunity to go work in their field for free because they've got to support themselves. And so we had this whole conversation about that it didn't even occur to me. I would never have considered a study abroad program because I didn't come from money, and I didn't even want to ask the question, can we afford this? Can I afford this? Because I didn't want to put anybody in the position of giving me a no. So I just didn't even consider it. And so I'm wondering, as we're talking about this, there's got to be a certain measure of outreach, education, awareness building within your community to say, you may have never thought about this before. You may have not even thought this was an option, but it is, and here's why. Would you consider? And I'm wondering how that works from your perspective and what results you see.
That's a really good question. And I think from where I'm sitting, it's all about creating the right partnerships. Because at the end of the day, I'm not an employee of Oberlin College. Oberlin Shansi is a separate entity, but we are so functionally integrated that there are ways that we can collaborate within the Oberlin community. Some of the partnerships that I invested in were for the Multicultural Resource Commons. That's where a lot of students of color and even LGBTQ plus students go as a space of support. And we started hosting info sessions in partnership with them. The Center for Student Success, I took all of their peer mentors out to lunch and talked to them about our programs and why they should tell everyone else about them too. And these are the ways that we offer specific kinds of support. I'm also really transparent about what we don't do and what we're trying to do and the areas where we may fall short, because I don't want someone to walk into this with rose-colored glasses. Living and working abroad is hard for almost anyone, but especially if you haven't had access to certain resources or you haven't had certain experiences, it can be even tougher. I also will say that for the recruitment process and specifically the selection process, I've been really big about asking big questions. There's always a question of, will this person face racism if they go to India or China or Japan, And I guess my question was, have they already faced racism coming to Oberlin? And just trying to navigate that conversation in a way where we don't treat anyone like so fragile that they don't have the tools and the skills to navigate certain things. And just understanding that, yeah, there's a certain amount of emotional labor that goes into coaching students who may not have had this kind of access before, coaching young professionals who may not have had this kind of access before, and not just them, but their families too. I would get phone calls from grandparents, and I would field those phone calls every single time because it's important for them to feel good about this as much as it is. We're doing contracts, we're doing terms of agreement with fellows who are anywhere from 22 to 27 years old. They're adults. But with that said, they are part of these larger networks that are meaningful and powerful. And if we don't recognize that, then we're at fault.
I think that's so important. Thank you, Dr. Samuel, for covering that. When you think about all the work that you're doing and where this program started, you mentioned historically it's been a little bit different. And just in the 5 years that you've been there, some transformations that have happened. What are some of the results that you're seeing because of this focus on equity and inclusion in the work?
I think one of the things that I'm really proud to see is just the makeup of our fellowship cohorts, the makeup of our visiting scholars. Like, DEI works both ways. We bring folks from Asia to the United States. And if we're, recruiting from India, just making sure that we are taking issues of caste and privilege in India into consideration when making those decisions as well. But also just seeing like who our grantees are and the types of work that they're doing. I think the proof is in the pudding. We have such vibrant and diverse fellowship classes, grant cohorts, visiting scholar classes that make this really meaningful and important. One other thing that is really important to me personally is I actually started a new grant program called the AAPI Experience Grant. In the past, Oberlin Shansi has had a historical rockiness with Asian American student populations. A lot of folks saw the types of work that we do in international exchange as colonialistic. And that is a conversation that I'm really willing to have. I do think you think, oh, you're sending young Americans abroad to teach and to work at nonprofits. That is colonialistic in and of itself. And I'm ready to engage in that conversation. One of the things I noticed is that a lot of Asian Americans There are certain years where there were a lot of Asian Americans who participated, but many years when they weren't. And it's how do we engage with Asian Americans to ask them if they want to do this and what would make this better? And this grant program in particular, we started in 2020, just with the rise of anti-Asian hate and the fact that I myself am Asian American and I wanted to be able to support projects that really explored the histories, the activisms, the solidarities between Asian American and queer, Black, Latinx, Indigenous communities to be able, I'm really big on stories if you haven't gathered by now, but like to be able to tell those stories in really real ways and to be able to offer funds, not for travel, but like for the just paying people for their intellectual and emotional labor of producing these stories and finding them out. So I think that is really important. Again, just making sure that we are creating resources, like material resources, concrete resources, not just like a link to someone else, but like actual money that we're investing into this process.
Wonderful. So I want to circle back to something you said earlier because you talked about preparing your fellows who go abroad to deal with things like homophobia, racism. What work do you do in the reverse to help the students and fellows who are coming to the US deal with that maybe for the first time ever?
That is a good question. Oberlin, Ohio is known to be a pretty open, accepting place, but I think it's important. We have scholars from Indonesia, some of whom are living in areas that practice Sharia law. And then we have to explain when you introduce yourself, you say your pronouns, he, him, she, her. Some folks do not identify within a gender binary. It's like just talking through what that looks like, talking through the fact that you will see someone who may not have the physicality of the gender that you would see that they are identifying with. You might see people wearing dresses who in your home country would not be wearing dresses. And just walking through that process of how things work here in a certain way, especially within Oberlin College's campus. And I think just having these conversations really openly and answering questions, people are really receptive. I think that you need to give people information in an accurate and transparent way, leave room for questions. And yeah, it's not nearly as, and I think that's really important. So I think that is something. We do have some conversations. So I don't run the Visiting Scholars Program as closely as some of my colleagues do, but just being there if they need to navigate local medical systems and just understanding what questions they need to be asking, ensuring that they are providing their insurance and things like that, because issues of gender, issues of race, they do inhere in medical systems here. And we don't necessarily like have overt conversations about that before, but just making sure that that support is readily available to them while they are navigating it. Should they need to, we hope they don't need to go to the hospital at any point. No one wants that, but just having that recognition is important.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Samuel, what are you hoping to accomplish, or what are you most looking forward to engaging in that's new in the next year or two?
I want to share some of what I've learned with other folks. There are other international exchange programs. I've already had some conversations with friends at Yale China and Princeton in Asia, and even Fulbright India. I've shown them the list of resources that we share. I've told them a little bit about the storytelling method, and I think we have, and they teach me things too. We have had conversations about what if a trans fellow is on HRT and wants to go to Japan? How does that work? I don't know that answer off the top of my head. But when I do find things out, I want to make sure to share it with other organizations that are similar. So I want to further explore what solidarity looks like between programs so that it's not insular to Oberlin Shansi. I think that's really important. The other thing is I want to really build out our programming some more. We're starting to think about what fundraising would look like for new programs. We're thinking of doing Asia to Asia exchanges between our partners where we actually decenter the West and have one of our visiting scholars from India going to one of our partner organizations in Indonesia to do some kind of academic or a project related collaboration, and just making sure that we're engaging with communities in Northern Ohio outside of Oberlin College. That's been a big push of mine. I am brown and I grew up in West Virginia. Like I'm an Appalachian kid, and I would have loved to have seen other brown people be able to talk about their experiences. And there are schools that are just like 15 miles, 10 miles, 5 miles away from this campus where we could be doing that with our visiting scholar program. One more little program plug. We're actually bringing 4 indigenous South Indian musicians to Oberlin next for our inaugural Visiting Artists and Practitioners program. We've had this Visiting Scholars program for over a century at this point, but we are pushing back on the idea that expertise requires an academic degree, and that there are artists, there are environmentalists who might not necessarily have a formal education, but have knowledge that is worth celebrating. So this is our inaugural program, but they are Adivasi musicians from indigenous tribes in South India. And just this idea that Oberlin has one of the most world-renowned conservatories in the world, but we're bringing musicians that don't necessarily dictate their music based on pitch and scale, but on this idea of sonic landscapes that reverberate and reflect the sounds of nature. Like, how can we complicate what music is globally? And let's create this opportunity for folks who would have never had this opportunity before. And also let's create this opportunity for Oberlin students to see what international musics could look like. Musics, plural.
That is amazing. You have so much going on, and I love your enthusiasm for it. And I know that bleeds into the work and into your relationship with your fellows and your students and your campus partners, and your fellowship partners. Thank you so much, Dr. Samuel,
Thank
for
you.
being part of this show, for sharing your enthusiasm and your expertise with our audience. It deserves to be celebrated as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, follow Lead at Any Level on LinkedIn and YouTube. Then join us for Including You video simulcast every Thursday at noon Eastern. Including You can also be enjoyed each week as part of the Living Corporate audio podcast series, available on all major podcast platforms. Learn more at living-corporate.com. Including You is brought to you in part by Lead at Any Level, a boutique training and consulting firm improving employee engagement and retention for companies that promote from within. Lead at Any Level. Leaders can be anywhere and should be everywhere. Learn more at leadatanylevel.com. Lead at Any Level and its logo are registered trademarks of Lead at Any Level LLC. The views and opinions of guests on our show do not necessarily reflect the positions of Lead at Any Level, Living Corporate, or the sponsors of Including You.
That's it for this week's episode of Including You. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to leave us a comment or a review so others can find us as well. Be sure to join me next week when my guest will be Dr. Renee Bahati Klug. She's the founder and principal of Culturally Intelligent